Hey, loyal DC fans and Spector Creative YouTube channel fans. We're back with our final installment of the DC Universe Classics Director's Commentary, and we've come a long way, many episodes. And so had the line. The line that started off with DC Superheroes, which was 6-inch of just Superman and Batman family characters, eventually, in 2005, broke the chains and signed a brand new contract with Warner Brothers Consumer Products and got Mattel access to the entire DC universe. And as cosmic alignment would happen to be, it was right when I came on, joining the marketing group. And as a huge DC fan, I got to oversee the launch of this line and pretty much the bulk of its retail time. We did 20 waves at retail. I worked on 19 of them. And there were heroes, there were villains, there were fan choice figures. We did Comic-Con executions. We did retailer exclusives, multi-packs. We basically did the entire DC universe. I think we really earned that title of DC Universe Classics, even with some name changes to Signature Series and Club Infinite Earths while it was online. At the end of the day, at the end of several years, we had a huge collection of 6-inch, highly articulated DC figures all in the same look. And right before things closed out, in our last year of Signature Series, we tried to sort of bait subscribers by putting out 2 versions of Doomsday, noting that if we hit Tier 1, we would do the Containment Suit version, and if we hit Tier 2, we would do the Unleashed version of Doomsday. It was a way to try to drum up sales in a line that was kind of shrinking in sales. Now, the Containment Suit version was much easier to do because it used a lot of parts from existing Collect and Connect figures like Calabac. And the Unleashed one was going to have a lot of new parts. New chest, new arms, new legs, new head. And we knew it was going to be a challenge to do, which is why he was with the second tier of subscribers. Well, even though we did not hit even the first tier and had to cancel the 2014 subscription line of monthly figures, we still had a sales target that we had to hit. And we had to be conscious of our tooling, because as the tooling increased, then the profit would go down. So if we were going to put these Doomsday figures out, we had to find a way to get the math to work, because one was a little bit of tooling, one was a lot of tooling. And we still had to make a certain amount of money for the brand. So the solution was to find a balance, and that balance was done by pairing these highly tooled figures with very, call it clever repaints. And we still had one trick to pull out of our hat, and if we were going to get these figures to market, it meant finding repaints that the fans would like. And obviously we didn't want to just do, wild, crazy deco. We wanted to find something that would be appeasing to the fans and balance out the tooling budget so that we could afford Doomsday. And to do this, we looked at the line that inspired DCU Classics, and the one that really was a visual signpost for the whole line, and that was Super Powers. And that was the final figure set that was offered on Matty Collector, was a 6-figure set of some of the most popular DC heroes in their Super Powers deco. So how did this work? Well,
let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
The short version is Super Powers, for those who grew up in the 80s, was kind of the mainstream DC universe. And it was the greatest DC toy line of all time, maybe until DCU Classics came along. And throughout DC Universe Classics, Super Powers was a huge guiding post, especially when it came to choosing which version of the figures, because we were huge fans of Super Powers, and we really saw DCU Classics as the next generation of this. So it's why you saw figures like Cyclotron showing up. I mean, he showed up in the DCU Classics line, and it was like, who is that guy? Well, he was in Super Powers. Or doing the red version of Steppenwolf. We did him in 6-inch Classics because that was how he was in Super Powers. Or even main characters like Green Arrow, we were very conscious of having them in their Super Powers look, at least for the initial release. And a big part of this is because Bill Benecke was the lead designer for like 90% of the line, and he's a huge DC fan. He knows his stuff, and he's so passionate about what he does. Everyone should thank him and write him thank you letters because he is the one who really made DCU Classics happen and get all this superpowers fun into it. So we showed off our Repaint line at a fan convention, and this was basically a last hurrah and, again, a way to pay for the tooling for Doomsday by putting out Repaint figures. Anytime you can redeco a figure and you don't need to tool it, it's a lot easier to do financially. And all the figures were going to come on Super Powers cards based on the cards that were issued in the 80s. This was also, not only a way to make the figures look cool, on your wall, but it was also something that was going to get picked up by other companies in later years. I like to think we kind of inspired this trend, or at least we're ahead of the trend of releasing modern figures on vintage cards, which I do love that other companies do this. It's really cool. So in addition to Batman, we also did Wonder Woman in brighter 80s colors. We now had yellow instead of gold, and, much more brighter superpowers colors. Superman didn't come out quite right. He was supposed to be a pale blue, and the blue was a little bit dimmer. It was less so than the original release, which was a dark blue, but it wasn't this version, which is what we were going for. And the reason that happened is because this run of figures was ridiculously small, like so tiny. It was like basically just at the MOQ, which is the minimum order quantity you can do with a vendor. And when we got our first samples back and noted that it was too dark, it was basically too late because the production run was so tiny, there wasn't a way to make a correction. I mean, we were aware of superpowers, obviously. We were aware of the vintage figures and what they looked like and what color they should be. It's not like we were living, in the dark here. But it was basically a logistical issue in the fact that this line was so tiny that when we got the review samples back, there was they had already produced the entire run. In other words, because it was so small. Usually, a very small run is done, which is called the PP run, the production pilot, and this small run then comes and you do review. But because the run was basically the same amount as the PP run, we didn't have time to fix it. So, unfortunately, the production pilot was the full run in this case. And that's why Kal-El did not have the light blue that we intended. All right, so after our main three heroes, we had a few other repaints in there and a little bit of a tooling surprise. So that was Mr. Mxyzptlk. And if you're not familiar with him, he is a interdimensional bad guy that shows up in Superman's comics and causes all types of mayhem. Batmite is also, I think, from his dimension. So he was included in the line for a few reasons. One, he was planned for superpowers. He never made it out. There was a whole, what's called the fourth wave, which was going to include Man-Bat and Manhunter and some original characters like Rocket Man and this really weird green guy with 4 arms that was Quadrex. So yeah, they were doing all sorts of stuff. These are all mock-ups. These are not real toys, but the art has sort of leaked out on the internet. Action Figure Insider did a great job on that a few years ago. And Mr. Mxyzptlk has had a few figures, but he'd never been in DCU Classics, and Bill Beneke was a huge fan of this character, and after all the work he had done on the line for years, I wasn't going to say no to getting this figure because Bill really wanted him, and, you kind of want to, you want to make the, keep design not happy, but, do things for them sometimes too. And so that was part of the reason, was because Bill was such a big fan of him. The other reason was we needed a smaller, less expensive figure to put the Build-A-Figure, or Connect and Connect piece, the biggest piece, the chest piece with. So we'll get more on that in a moment. So he kind of helped pay for that. All right, then our 2 last figures who still in that kind of, what bucket? Like, who are these? You've got Riddler and you've got a gold Superman. Both figures, you're still, people are like, wait, I don't remember those. Well, that's because the gold Superman was never released. It was a figure in the 80s that was planned for release. And again, artwork has shown up online. This was supposed to be part of a program in 1988 that was going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Man of Steel. And it was going to go along with a whole line of Superman-themed product, the gold Superman being kind of a commemorative figure for this. Here was the mock-up that showed up online. So we wanted to do a figure that was an homage to this, and again, it was a sort of free repaint. There was no tooling involved, and that was the theme behind this whole line. The other repaint was this guy, was the Riddler. And if you're looking at him like, what the heck, that is the weirdest looking Riddler, and why is he on a Spanish card? Even the back was in Spanish. Okay, there's an explanation. So this figure of the Riddler is, there's obviously been many versions of the Riddler over the years. Sometimes he's in a suit, sometimes he's in a spandex outfit, sometimes he has a hat, sometimes he doesn't. This version in particular was a repaint of Green Lantern. So back in the vintage line, the subsidiary that was distributing Kenner product in South America took a Green Lantern figure and repainted it as the Riddler and released it as part of their Super Amigos line. So here's Green Lantern in Super Amigos, and here is said Riddler. And he even still has the ring on his finger. It's just painted over. And yes, you can see that there's like sort of a color mix match between his limbs, where his lower legs and upper arms are a lighter green. So we wanted to basically do exactly this. And I kind of thought there's no way Warner Brothers is going to approve this because it's so weird and out there. But fortunately, Chaz Fitzhugh, who I have not mentioned enough, he was the head of the DC approval team at Warner Brothers, and he is an amazing guy and a huge DC fan. It's rare to have such a big fan in the licensing department, and I'm so grateful we got to work with him because it was because of him that we got so much approval over the years, because he knew what we were doing. And he also remembered that they had previously approved Brick Bear, I think it's called, to do an homage to this figure. So same thing, where they repainted a figure as Green Lantern as the Riddler. So he greenlit the idea, no pun intended, and definitely have him to thank for ushering this through the approval process in what otherwise probably would have been a rejection. All right, so our lineup is almost complete, but we also had a collect and connect figure to do. And this was essentially done to drive sell-through, so we could sell all the product. We had to sell all of these figures to make basically the bottom line of sales. And Calabac had previously been released in green deco, which kind of matched his most recent appearance in the animated Justice League Unlimited and Superman animated series. He had come out, was it Wave 6? Yeah, I believe it was Wave 6 Build-A-Figure. Back in the vintage era, Calabac in the Super Powers line was in a brown deco. So once again, we had an existing sculpt, no tooling, and a reference for a legitimate repaint. And of course, the vintage one based on the current animation at the time when he was in brown. So, totally made sense. And again, legitimate deco to do. So the parts were broken up and put with each figure. Now, originally packaging wanted to include them in the blister, but I was very adamant that they not be, because it would have meant that it had to be more of a box and wouldn't have been able to be the single figure on a card, which was sort of the whole point. And that's why Mr. Mixel-Pitalik came with the biggest piece, because, he offset the cost. So the idea then was to pack all of the Build-A-Figure pieces for Calabac here inside the white shipper box, but not in the blister. And this was done, again, to preserve the fact that these were going to be single-carded figures to look like the vintage line from Kenner. Well, unfortunately, my push to not have them included in the blister totally backfired. So we had them just as an insert there. You see, it was also packed in the white shipper box. There you can see a Calabac piece next to a figure. Well, unfortunately, because you could remove the Build-A-Figure piece without opening the figure, so many people returned their figures saying that there was no Build-A-Figure piece included and that it was missing. And, I'm not to accuse anyone, but I don't think the Build-A-Figure pieces were missing. I kind of think people took the Build-A-Figure pieces out and then returned the figure, since they didn't have to open the blister, and this way they got a free Calabac. And because there were so many returns, of figures claiming there was no Build-A-Figure piece, it set off a red alert, which went to upper management, and upper management was not happy at all. And basically because of this, the whole Super Powers line backfired. It didn't hit its sales goal, and that pulled the plug. That was like the last nail in the coffin, was because we had so many returns that the house kind of collapsed on itself, and not putting the Build-A-Figure piece in the blister, which I did because I insisted on that because I thought people would want to hang the cards up on their wall. Unfortunately, that meant so many people made returns saying there was no Build-A-Figure piece. Well, that was the end of that. So I was asked after this to transfer over to the Hot Wheels group and work on the launch of Star Wars Hot Wheels, which I was very excited about. I started at Hot Wheels in the beginning. That was my first job at Mattel as a Hot Wheels copywriter, and I was now coming back to Hot Wheels as a marketing director. But I was also in charge of Matty Collector, and when the opportunity came to move over to Jakks Pacific and work on more DC action figures, and also work on action figures for toy lines or brands that I hadn't worked on before, namely Star Wars. I mean, as great as Star Wars vehicles were, my real love was Star Wars action figures. And with a young family at home, and since I was kind of hitting a wall with Mattel, more responsibility, but I wasn't really getting a pay grade or a title change, just asked to do more stuff, basically. So I accepted Jakks' opportunity and moved over to Jakks, and this was kind of how I left Mattel. So after I left, the 6-inch line for DC went basically into retirement. We'd advertised Doomsday as the last figure, and Mattel, the new team, this was not me, this was after I left, relaunched DC as a multiverse line in 3 3/4 scale, which is kind of traditional Star Wars G.I. Joe scale. And what was really cool about this was they had access at a whole bunch more content that we never had access to before. There was another upgrade to the contract. So things like the 1989 Batman movies. Well, as cool as it was, 3 3/4 wasn't the way people were collecting their DC line, and the 3 3/4 scale kind of went belly up. So the 6-inch line was more or less dragged out of retirement and relaunched, keeping the name Multiverse. And now, very smartly though, I think, they were tying it more into movie releases, which is how Marvel Legends does it, very, very smartly, because that's what helps get you peg space at retail. So all of the content was essentially what carried the line forward now, and they were still mixing in your comic book characters, but using the movies as the vehicle to get the line back to retail, because retail was not into a comic book only line. They needed the content to really be the push. So you'd sprinkle in some comic book characters, but really lean heavily on the new live action and the new movies. And that was also a thing we didn't have in my time working on the brand. We had a couple Batman movies and a Green Lantern movie. So, this new multiverse line was really cool. It also had, some animated style figures, and it had some figures that looked like they were right out of DCU Classics, like Wonder Girl there. One of the few figures I thought really, looked like it belonged in DCU Classics. And as the DC theatricals kind of, waned, if you will, so did the license with Mattel, and eventually it went off to Spin Master and McFarlane Toys. And that was the end. And the line was riding into the sunset. It was an amazing journey, and it was honestly one of the biggest honors I've ever had working in the toy industry to have gotten to work on this line. And I cannot thank Mattel and Warner Brothers and DC Comics for the opportunity to work on this. It was amazing. If you like this video and this whole series, be sure to share it with others, because it helps tell YouTube to share it with more people. It's part of their algorithm. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing and liking and all that stuff. And there's more DC videos to come just because we're done with this series. Next up, we're going to talk about the Watchmen.